On the morning of October 14th, 1066, a ridge above the Sussex countryside held the fate of England. The mist had not yet lifted when thousands of Anglo-Saxon warriors locked into position along the crest of Senlac Hill, shields raised, axes ready, shoulder pressed to shoulder, in a wall of iron that stretched the length of the ridgeline. They had just marched 300 miles in less than 3 weeks. They had just fought and won the most brutal battle in a generation. They were exhausted, depleted, and standing on a hill they had chosen, not out of careful strategy, but because there was no more time. Below them, a Norman army waited in the gray morning light. Harold Godwinson, King of England, believed he controlled the battlefield. His shield wall had never been broken in living memory when properly held. The high ground was his. The slopes approaching his line were steep enough to slow any charge, steep enough to drain the energy of cavalry before they reached the front rank. If the Normans came uphill all day and got nowhere, the English could outlast them. He did not need to win. He needed to not lose. What he could not see, what he did not know, was that William of Normandy had already spotted the one weakness Harold could not fix. And by nightfall, it would cost England 500 years of history. To understand what happened on that ridge, you have to understand the year that brought Harold there in the first place. January of 1066. King Edward the Confessor died without a direct heir, and England became the most contested throne in the known world. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful nobleman in the kingdom, was crowned almost immediately. But 2 men refused to accept it. Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, claimed the English crown through an old dynastic agreement. William, Duke of Normandy, claimed Edward had promised it to him personally, and that Harold himself had sworn an oath to support that promise. Both men began preparing to invade. England suddenly faced war on 2 fronts. In September, Hardrada struck first. He crossed the North Sea with a fleet of more than 300 ships, carrying an army estimated at around 15,000 men. Harold's own brother Tostig, exiled after a failed rebellion in Northumbria, sailed alongside him. The 2 northern earls, Edwin and Morcar, moved to stop them and were crushed at the Battle of Fulford on the 20th of September. York fell. The north was open. Harold moved with remarkable speed. Gathering forces as he marched, he drove his army northward and fell on the Norwegians at Stamford Bridge on the 25th of September. The battle was a near total annihilation. Harold Hardrada was killed. Tostig was killed. Of the 300 ships that had carried the Norse army to England, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. It was one of the greatest English military victories in centuries, and it came in a single afternoon. But the price was invisible from the outside. Harold's housecarls, his professional household warriors, the elite soldiers who formed the hardened front rank of every English shield wall, had fought and bled at Stamford Bridge. These were not men who could be replaced in a week. They were the veterans who held the wall while everyone else stood behind them, and they had been killing and dying in Yorkshire when William's fleet crossed the Channel. 3 days after Stamford Bridge, William landed at Pevensey on England's southeast coast. Harold received the news in York. He did not wait to rest his army. He did not call for the northern levies to reassemble, did not give his housecarls time to recover. His instinct was the same one that had served him well in Wales in 1063 and at Stamford Bridge 3 weeks earlier. Move fast, strike before the enemy can consolidate, win through surprise. He turned his army around and force-marched south. It was the move William had been hoping for. William had spent the days after landing doing something that looked like simple plundering, but was calculated to be far more. His forces spread through Sussex, seizing food, burning villages, raiding in a pattern that the Bayeux Tapestry would later record in careful detail. This was not simple greed, it was provocation. William understood Harold. He knew that an English king could not stand by while his kingdom burned, knew that Harold's reputation depended on protecting his people, knew that Harold would come south before he was ready. Harold obliged. He reached London around the 6th of October and pushed on almost immediately. His army arrived near Hastings on the evening of the 13th, moving into position on Senlac Hill under darkness. William's scouts had already tracked his approach. The element of surprise, Harold's greatest weapon, had been stripped away before the battle even began. On the morning of October 14th, William marched his forces out and arrayed them below the ridge. What he had brought was a combined arms army of roughly 7,000 men. Archers, infantry, and cavalry organized into 3 divisions. The Breton contingent on the left, his Norman corps in the center, Franco-Flemish forces on the right, 3 combat arms, 3 divisions. Flexible, drilled, capable of shifting weight across the front. Harold had none of those advantages. His army, somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 men, with numbers heavily debated by historians, was almost entirely infantry. Housecarls in the front ranks, wearing mail hauberks and carrying the long Danish axes they had wielded at Stamford Bridge. Behind them, the select furred, experienced levied soldiers, competent, reasonably well equipped, but not professionals. And behind them, the general furred, militia who had answered the call, but who wore leather where the housecarls wore mail, who had trained together for months rather than years. Harold planted his twin standards at the crest of the hill and set his wall. William's problem was immediately obvious. Archers shooting uphill into overlapping shields achieved almost nothing in the opening exchanges. The cavalry, his most dangerous weapon, could not build momentum on a steep slope against a locked formation. Infantry marching uphill into the front rank of housecarls died in numbers the assault could not sustain. Hour after hour, Norman waves rolled up the southern slope and broke against the wall. The ridgeline held. This is where Harold's plan was working, and this is where William began to see something Harold could not. The shield wall was not one uniform structure. It was a composition. The housecarls in the front were immovable, but the furred behind them, the men who would need to step forward into the front rank as housecarls fell, had a quality built into them that Harold could not train away. They had been taught to pursue. In English warfare, when an enemy broke and ran, you ran after them and destroyed them in the open. Harold himself had done exactly that at Stamford Bridge, flooding across the bridge to slaughter the fleeing Norse. That instinct was not a flaw. In almost every other battle, it was a killing tool. On Senlac Hill, it was a vulnerability. The revelation came mid-morning, almost by accident. A rumor swept through the Norman left, the Breton division, that William had been killed. What happened next is described in contemporary accounts and depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry. The Breton left broke, not as a tactic, as panic. Men streaming back downhill in confusion, the formation collapsing from within. Most historians, including Mark Morris, now argue this first retreat was entirely real, genuine disorder triggered by a false report. Part of the English right side of the shield wall saw it. The furred, not the housecarls, could not hold. They broke ranks and charged downhill in pursuit, just as they had been trained to do, just as they had done at Stamford Bridge. They left the wall. They ran down the slope after what looked like a broken enemy. William ripped off his helmet and rode through his reforming lines, showing his face, proving he was alive. His cavalry rallied. And then they did what cavalry does to infantry, caught in the open on a slope with no formation and nowhere to run. The pursuing English were encircled on a hillock south of the ridge and cut down. The shield wall had not been attacked from the outside. Part of it had abandoned itself. William watched the result from below. The wall above him was shorter than it had been, and now he understood the mechanism. The furd's aggression was not a problem to overcome. It was the weapon. He did not need to break the shield wall. He needed to make the English break it for him. What followed was not improvisation. It was the deliberate and systematic dismantling of an army using that army's own instincts against it. William reorganized his assault pattern. All 3 divisions would launch continuous rotating attacks. Cavalry, then infantry, then cavalry again, cycling fresh troops into the assault, while the English front rank could not rotate, could not rest, could not be replaced without degrading the quality of the line. The housecarls had to stand and absorb blow after blow with no relief. As they fell, Ferd stepped forward into positions in the front rank, men in leather facing men in mail, men with less training facing the finest cavalry in northern France. The ridgeline grew shorter, the wall thinned. When William judged that sections of the front were now held by feared rather than housecarls, he ordered his cavalry to feign retreat. They turned. They streamed back downhill as if fleeing, as if the assault had finally broken, as if the English had won. According to William of Poitiers, who was there and recorded the battle, and corroborated by the imagery of the Bayeux Tapestry, this happened deliberately at least twice. Some sources suggest 3 times in total. Each time it worked. The Ferd could not hold. Seeing the Norman cavalry fleeing down the slope, they broke ranks and charged in pursuit. Each time, the Norman horsemen wheeled, reformed, and turned on the pursuers in the open ground below the ridge. Each time, a section of the English army was cut off from the wall, encircled, and destroyed. Each time, the line above contracted a little further. Harold did not respond. He did not launch a counterattack when the Breton panic offered him a genuine window. He did not order a fighting retreat northward into the Andredsweald forest, which lay just behind Caldbec Hill, and would have neutralized Norman cavalry entirely. He held his position and watched his army consume itself in sections. His brothers Gurth and Leofwine were killed during the fighting. The English command was fraying. By late afternoon, what remained of the shield wall bore little resemblance to the formation that had held the ridge at dawn. The housecarls who still stood were the best soldiers in England, veterans who would not break and would not run. But they were too few, too isolated, their line too compressed. The Ferd that had repeatedly chased phantom retreats downhill had repeatedly been destroyed in the open ground below the ridge. William had not beaten these men in a fair fight. He had emptied the wall from the inside. In the final phase of the battle, accounts describe William ordering his archers to elevate their trajectory, sending arrows arcing over the front ranks to fall onto the compressed English center from above. Whether Harold was struck by an arrow in this phase, as tradition holds, and as the Bayeux Tapestry has long suggested, remains debated among historians. Some accept the account. Others question the interpretation of the tapestry scene. What is not debated is the result. Harold was killed. The exact manner is uncertain, but the consequence is not. Without Harold, the wall dissolved. The survivors fled north toward Caldbec Hill and the tree line of the Andredsweald. Norman cavalry pursued. The resistance that had held for 8 hours, from dawn until dusk, collapsed in the final minutes. The battle had lasted a full day. English losses were estimated in the thousands, Norman losses somewhat lower, though both figures remain contested by historians. What was beyond dispute was the finality of the result. Harold's brothers were dead. The Godwinson dynasty had ended on the ridge. There was no king left to rally around. William moved north methodically. Romney, Dover, and Canterbury fell in rapid succession. London, the great city that should have been England's last strong point, found itself isolated and without a coherent defense. By Christmas Day of 1066 in Westminster Abbey, William was crowned King of England. It is worth pausing to understand exactly what William had done on that ridge, because the brilliance of it is easy to overlook if you only read the outcome. He had arrived at Senlac Hill with a force that, on paper, should not have been able to break the English position. His cavalry was useless on the slope. His archers were wasted firing uphill. His infantry alone could not match the housecarls. Every conventional weapon he brought to the battlefield was blunted by the terrain Harold had chosen. So William did not fight the battle Harold had designed. He fought a different one. He read the English army not as a single formation, but as two different forces sharing the same position. The unbreakable housecarls and the aggressive, instinct-driven feared. He found the seam between them. He applied attrition to the first group and temptation to the second. He wore down the men who would not move and baited out the men who would. He turned the English army's greatest institutional habit, the pursuit, into a weapon that fired in the wrong direction. The shield wall was never broken from outside. It was vacated from within, section by section, by its own soldiers chasing a retreat that was never real. The consequences ran far beyond a single battle. Anglo-Saxon England, 5 centuries of language, law, custom, and political tradition, ended on that Sussex ridge. Within 5 years, Norman lords had replaced the English aristocracy across the country. Castles rose where thatch had stood. French words flooded into the English language, reshaping its grammar and its literature for centuries forward. The Domesday Book, the feudal reorganization, the restructuring of the church, all of it flowed from one October afternoon on one hill above the Sussex coast. William commissioned an abbey on the site of the battle as penance, Battle Abbey, with its high altar placed where Harold fell. The structure still stands today. The ridge is still there. Senlac Hill, quiet and green, where one of the most consequential tactical decisions in English history was made not with a sword, but with a mind. William did not wait for Harold to make a mistake. He designed a situation in which Harold's greatest strength, a disciplined, aggressive army on strong defensive ground, would become the mechanism of its own destruction. He took the instinct that had made the English army dangerous and aimed it back at itself. One duke, one battle, one afternoon, and England was never the same again.